Hello, this is Ramirez with Tidewater Renaissance Fighting Arts, and today I wanted to talk a little bit more about the left-handed part of this, and I want to help people who are left-handed in studying HEMA. And it can be very challenging. A lot of groups will tend to teach by the book, which is great, but some techniques don't translate when you're fighting or when you're practicing or even learning them as a left-hander with a room full of right-handed people. So I wanted to talk a little bit about things you can do as a left-handed person to help you to learn HEMA and to be good at HEMA. So one of the first things is that we have a natural advantage when it comes to studying solo. And one of the best tools that we can use is a mirror. Because right now, and I think when I record this is my left hand, but it may appear to you as a right because of the way it's recorded. That's the same thing you'd have in a mirror. In other words, the reflection you cast is of a right-handed opponent, not of a left-handed opponent. When a right-hander looks in a mirror, they are seeing a left-handed opponent. And so their techniques, they can't really study in a mirror because normally if you're practicing it versus righty, you'd want to see the sword in the other side. The reason that this is valuable is that if, let's say, I practice a position or I practice a high Vomtag and I'm doing an Oberhau, well, what I'm looking at in the mirror is a right-handed person doing that technique. So I can look at where the hands are, at where the body, the shoulder, anything is, and that's going to be where a right-hander would be. So you can look at that and say, okay, there's an opening. There's an opening. When they finish their technique, there's an opening. And by studying that, so if I attempt let's say I'm here and I attempt a Zverka, I can see where the blade is going to be coming, where the openings are, and then I can practice to kind of exploit that. So that's one of those things that's useful. I apologize for the camera kind of adjusting. But as we go, we want to think about, if I practice with a mirror, I can see the opening. So if I do any technique, I can look at that and say, hey, that's where a right-hander would be. Where are the potential openings? Where are the follow-throughs? What can I do when fighting against a right-handed opponent? So you can kind of train your brain to say, okay, here's where they are, here's where their openings are. And I don't think that's an advantage that a right-handed person can typically get out of mirror training. Now, if you've seen my training hall, the one that we use at TRFA, we have a big wall-to-ceiling mirror there, so it's very easy to find a spot. If you don't have one in your school, if you have a full-length mirror at home, as long as you're mindful of your surroundings, you can practice these techniques. And really, that is a very, very good thing to be doing. Next, if you're taking classes at your local club, when you have the chance to practice against someone, if you practice the technique lefty to righty, it won't work. It won't work properly, I should say. So it's helpful if you have someone in your club who's maybe a little more advanced than you. Maybe they're in a beginning class, but they don't need to be, or maybe they're not at all a beginner. And they're willing to switch hands and go left-handed with you. Take them up on it. Ask them if they wouldn't mind. Because then you'll learn the technique as it's meant to be learned in the book, as it's meant to be used. Now granted, there's some adaptation to be done when you're fighting right hand, but when you're first trying to learn a technique, it's good to learn it the way it's intended. And then you can kind of reverse engineer or do what you need to do to make it work for you as a left-handed person. So if you have a chance, if someone in your club is either not practicing or they're good enough to do it anyway or they already know it, it'll give them the added bonus of learning it left-handed which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but also it'll give you the chance to learn the technique as it's supposed to be done. Because if you're a left-handed person trying to do a technique on a right-handed person as a right-handed person, a lot of times some of the more complex cuts and things do not work as well. I know for one of the first clubs I joined, they were doing saber cuts and things, and nothing was working according to plan because there'd be openings on me as a left-handed person that as a right-handed person it wouldn't have worked out that way. So I strongly recommend, if you can get a chance, that someone will practice with you left-handed, or if even better you have two left-handed people in your club, definitely pair with that person to learn new techniques. Speaking of more advanced cuts, more advanced techniques, understand that as a left-handed person, there are certain techniques that will work better for you because of your placement, because of where your arm is, and there are some techniques that will work worse for you. And you'll find these out. Some of the more complex cuts, where the angles are, one side may work better for you than the other side. So if you're attempting, let's say, duplieren, if I step to my right and attempt a duplieren during my cut and coming across, because of where my sword's placed, where my arm is placed, that actually works ridiculously well. So it's something to kind of keep in mind as you learn different techniques. Try to figure out the ones that will work best and most advantageously for you. And also know that some of them really aren't going to work, or they're not going to work anywhere near as well. The right-hander is going to have the advantage. So if you can practice things from both sides, from attacking from the left, attacking from the right, and you find that something really works well for you, make a note of it. Make a note of things that don't work as well for you, where every time you try it, the right-hander just clears out. That technique may not work for you. It may not work for you from that side, so try the other side. And if it works to your advantage, great. If it works about equal, great. I think Zella, where in Meyer, where you just kind of hit both sides, it doesn't matter left-handed or right-handed, because the idea is to provoke a response. So there are some things that are completely neutral and work both for left-handers and for right-handers. But it's kind of important to keep in mind that there are some techniques that will actually work to your benefit as a left-handed person. So these are three simple things that you can do as a left-hander studying HEMA that will help you. The first one, utilize a mirror so you can visualize a right-handed opponent and what they would do with a different cut, what angles would work best for you, where you step, how will that counter. A lot of times as a left-handed person, following after, not rising, just going second in a blow, especially if I'm looking at a mirror, I'll see it. If my opponent attacks first, if I can avoid that, the counter cut, because of where they're extending their own body, will leave certain vulnerabilities to their right side that if they were fighting someone who's right-handed, they wouldn't be able to take advantage of, that actually you can take advantage of. So don't be afraid to kind of cut second, because a lot of times that will create that opening, and it will create that opening particularly on the weapon dominant side. You'll notice that when I do some of the treatises, I'll talk about dominant hand rather than left or right, because that's kind of how we should perceive things. That will also help you when you eventually do fight left-handers as well. If you take that second rule I made about trying to fight another person left-handed, whether or not they're normally left-handed or they will opt to study with you left-handed, that'll stop the awkward situation when two left-handers meet each other of, crap, what do I do? And everyone kind of looking at it says, well, why don't you do this or that? Because they're experienced as right-handers fighting people in the same hand. Whereas we tend not to be, are a little more put off by that. So the more you can practice with a fellow left-hander, as I said, all the technique becomes textbook because you're now fighting left-hander and left-hander, so the blades are on opposite sides of the body, and that can be incredibly useful. So you gain the ability to fight other left-handers, and you'll kind of learn how those techniques are supposed to work. And then, of course, taking those notes about which techniques work better for you as a left-handed person. And it may be that a technique works great on a right side attack. Sometimes it'll work better as a left side attack. And these are kind of things that right-handers are a little less inclined to examine. If you're righty to righty, it works the way the book tells you it works. So you don't tend to notice a strength left to right. But as a lefty, there are definitely techniques that work better for you because you're left-handed. And because, once again, right-handers don't generally have to think that way. A right-hander can generally just follow the book or follow the lesson, and the technique works out fine. We tend to have to examine things a little bit better, and when we do examine it better, that's when we really get an advantage in using our left-handedness when we're fighting. So these are some things to keep in mind. You're going to learn things a little bit different from the right-handed people in that your sword is placed in different places. You're as opposed to being diagonally opposite, so in theory your blades are going this way or that way, you're actually coming from the same side, and that does change how techniques work. So you should spend time exploring that. And if you want to explore it on your own, having a full-length mirror and seeing effectively a right-handed person and saying, well, I would do this, how would they work? Well, all you have to do is do the technique yourself. You can see where a right-hander puts their openings. You can see in a different technique where are they most vulnerable. So these are, I suppose, little tricks. They aren't tricks. They're just ways to study when you are left-handed. I know kind of reading some of the different treatises and stuff can be difficult in that you have to remember anytime they say left, you have to do right. But sometimes just being able to view how that looks can show you the openings, and the treatises won't cover that as much. So really taking a hard look at what's going on with a right-hander can really give you some big advantages in studying and in your practice. And that's kind of the main way you're going to learn. As I said, don't try to learn particularly advanced or new to you cuts and attacks without doing it with a left-hander, because that will really make a big difference. With a right-handed person, if it's particularly disadvantageous to you, you can get hurt. I know when someone was doing saber techniques, they literally were able to hit the bone in my wrist just because it was exposed. It wouldn't be if I was right-handed. But as a left-handed person, I really didn't have that advantage. So I would say always try to study new techniques with someone who's willing to be left-handed, or if, as I said, if in your club you have another left-handed person, take advantage of that. And then, as I said, make a note. If you learn a technique and you're like, wow, this works really well, and the right-handed person's having more trouble, it's because you have a natural advantage on that side. And making a note of which ones work better and also which ones work worse, where, wow, the right-handed person beats me every time I try to do this. There are some things that will not work to your advantage, or it won't be equal. It will actually be advantageous to a right-handed person. So kind of keep that in mind as you learn different techniques. I promise I will be putting out more left-handed stuff, because that is part of the point of the channel. Right now, I am in 2022 doing the Year of the Montante, so I've been putting out a lot of Montante videos, but I do plan to go back to kind of my original goal here, which is to help out left-handed HEMA fighters. All right, well, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you are curious about our club, Tidewater Renaissance Fighting Arts, we're based out of Norfolk, Virginia, and I will leave a link in the description. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.